Voices from the Ranks, The Long Patrol, A Soldier's Journey Through Vietnam. Book 1, Into the Green Hell, Prologue, Ohio, 1998. Rain tapped softly against the window. The old man sat on the porch, with a mug of black coffee warming his hands. His hair had long since turned silver, and the scars on his left forearm had faded to pale white lines that only he ever noticed anymore. Across the yard, his grandson chased a baseball with the same boundless energy Mike Sullivan had once possessed. On the small table beside him rested an old olive green field jacket. Folded neatly in one pocket was a faded photograph. 4 young men smiled into the camera, helmets pushed back, sleeves rolled up, convinced that the future belonged to them. Only one of them had lived long enough to grow old. The boy ran over. "Grandpa, were you really in Vietnam?" Mike smiled, but it was the tired smile of a man who had carried memories for more than 30 years. "I was." "What was it like?" Mike looked beyond the garden, beyond Ohio, beyond 1998. His eyes settled somewhere 6,000 miles away. "I could tell you about the battles." He paused. "I could tell you about the helicopters." Another pause. "I could tell you about the jungle." He looked down at the old photograph. "But that wouldn't really explain Vietnam." He took a slow breath. "The first thing Vietnam took from me wasn't my courage. It wasn't my innocence. It wasn't even my friends. It took away the boy who stepped onto that airplane." The rain continued to fall. "Let me tell you about him." Chapter 1. Across the Pacific, September 1965. The station clock read 4:37. It was still dark when Mike Sullivan climbed out of his father's Chevrolet outside the Greyhound terminal in Columbus, Ohio. The air carried the cool bite of early autumn. His duffel bag felt heavier than it had any right to. Not because of the clothes inside, because of what it represented. His mother wrapped her coat tighter around herself. She had hardly spoken during the drive. Every few minutes she looked at Mike as though trying to memorize his face. His father broke the silence. "You got everything?" Mike nodded. "Yes, sir." His father reached for the duffel. "I'll carry that." "No, Dad?" Mike smiled. "I better get used to carrying it." His father gave the smallest of smiles. "Fair enough." Inside the terminal, dozens of young men waited. Some joked loudly, some smoked. Some stared silently through the windows into the darkness. Almost all wore fresh green uniforms. Almost all looked too young. Mike noticed mothers crying quietly, fathers pretending not to, girlfriends holding hands just a little longer. Nobody mentioned Vietnam. Nobody needed to. It hung in the air like an unspoken sentence. An elderly porter pushed a trolley past them. "Military?" Mike nodded. The porter smiled sadly. "Good luck, son." There was something in the old man's voice. Not pity. Recognition. As though he'd once stood exactly where Mike stood now. "Michael." His mother finally spoke. She reached into her handbag. "I nearly forgot." She placed a small silver medal into his hand. "St. Christopher, the patron saint of travelers. It belonged to your grandfather." Mike looked at it. "I can't take this." "You can." Her eyes filled with tears. "And you will." She fastened the chain around his neck herself. For a brief moment, he was 10 years old again. The bus took them to the airport. By sunrise, they were airborne. California waited. Then, Vietnam. The aircraft was packed with soldiers. Most were 19 or 20. Some had never left their home state. The man beside Mike stretched out a hand. "Name's Tommy Walker." "Texas." Mike shook it. "Mike." "Ohio." Tommy grinned. "You ever been overseas?" Mike laughed. I've barely been outside, Ohio. Tommy leaned back. My daddy says it'll all be over before Christmas. Mike smiled politely. Neither of them knew that Christmas in Vietnam was still a long way away. Hours later, California. The military terminal buzzed with activity. C-130Os roared overhead. Cargo pallets lined the runway. Helicopters ferried supplies. The smell of aviation fuel filled the warm afternoon air. Mike noticed something strange. Men coming home, some smiled. Many didn't. One walked with a cane. Another had an empty sleeve pinned neatly to his jacket. A sergeant carrying a duffel stopped beside the new arrivals. He looked them over. Fresh uniforms, polished boots, clean faces. First trip? Nobody answered. He nodded. Thought so. He adjusted the strap on his bag. When you get there, he hesitated, listen to your squad leader. He looked each of them in the eye. He'll keep you alive. Without another word, he walked away. Nobody laughed after that. That evening, they boarded a civilian charter aircraft. Rows upon rows of young Americans. Some wrote letters. Some played cards. Some stared out the windows. Mike opened a notebook. He began writing. Dear Mom and Dad, we just left California. Everyone says Vietnam is beautiful. I'm not worried. I'll be home before you know it. He stopped writing, folded the letter, placed it inside an envelope. He hoped every word would prove true. Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beneath the aircraft. Hour after hour, water, cloud, sky. Night slowly swallowed the horizon. Somewhere ahead, a war waited. The cabin lights dimmed. Most of the soldiers slept. Mike couldn't. He thought about home. Saturday baseball games, his father's workshop, his mother's Sunday dinners, his little sister chasing fireflies during summer evenings. He wondered what they'd be doing 6 months from now. He had no idea that 6 months could change a man forever. Near midnight, the aircraft hit turbulence. A few soldiers laughed nervously. Tommy nudged Mike. Think the Viet Cong are shooting at us already? Mike chuckled. I hope not. The laughter faded quickly. It always did. Hours later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. Silence spread through the cabin. Men who had been sleeping sat upright. Card games stopped. Books closed. Cigarettes were extinguished. Nobody spoke. Mike looked through the small oval window. Far below, he saw lights scattered across a black landscape. Vietnam. The aircraft banked gently. The engines changed pitch. Mike felt his stomach tighten. He reached into his shirt. His fingers found St. Christopher's medal. He closed his hand around it. The wheels lowered with a heavy mechanical thump. The runway lights grew brighter. The aircraft descended through low cloud. Mike took one slow breath. Then another. He didn't know it yet. But the moment those wheels touched the runway, the longest journey of his life would truly begin. Welcome to Vietnam. Tan Son Nhut Air Base, Republic of Vietnam, September 1965. The first thing Mike noticed wasn't the heat. It was the smell. The aircraft door swung open with a metallic groan. And before anyone had a chance to stand, a wave of hot, damp air rolled through the cabin like the breath of an open furnace. It carried the sharp scent of jet fuel, diesel exhaust, damp earth, smoke from distant fires, and something sweet yet rotten that he couldn't identify. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The cool autumn air of Ohio already felt like another lifetime. "Move it, gentlemen!" shouted an Air Force crew chief. "Grab your gear and keep the line moving." One by one, the young soldiers shuffled down the narrow aisle. Boots scraped against the metal floor. Duffel bags banged against seats. No one joked now. Mike stepped onto the stairs. The humidity wrapped around him instantly. Within seconds, sweat trickled down his back. He paused at the bottom of the steps, taking in the scene before him. The airfield seemed alive. Huge transport aircraft taxied across the runway, while mechanics worked beneath open-engine cowlings. Huey helicopters swept overhead in every direction, their rotor blades beating the air with a deep, rhythmic whop, whop, whop that Mike felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. Forklifts darted between stacks of ammunition crates, fuel trucks rumbled past, military police directed convoys through the maze of vehicles. Everywhere he looked, men were moving with purpose. Nobody stood still. "Keep moving," an MP barked. Mike adjusted the strap of his duffel and followed the line. The heat became oppressive within minutes. His uniform clung to his skin. Tommy Walker, walking beside him, wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "I thought Texas was hot," he muttered. "This place makes Texas feel like spring." Mike managed a weak smile. "I don't think I've stopped sweating since we landed." A nearby veteran overheard them. He was lean, tanned, almost black by the tropical sun. His sleeves rolled high above muscular forearms. His helmet cover was faded, and the expression on his face suggested he'd long ago stopped being surprised by anything. He chuckled. "Boys," he said, "you ain't even started sweating yet." The veteran continued walking without another word. Inside a processing building, ceiling fans turned lazily above rows of wooden benches. The fans moved the air, but they did little to cool it. A lieutenant stood at the front. "Welcome to Vietnam." His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "You'll receive your unit assignments today. Until then, stay together, follow instructions, and don't wander off. This isn't California." A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. The lieutenant didn't smile. "Out there," he pointed beyond the walls, "there's a war going on." Silence settled over the room. Hours passed in paperwork, medical checks, equipment issue, briefings. Names were called, units assigned. Men disappeared one by one. Finally, "Sullivan Michael." Mike stood. "1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile." He'd heard of them. Everyone had. The newspapers back home spoke of helicopters carrying soldiers into battle as if it were the future of warfare. He wondered if that future would keep him alive. Outside, the afternoon sky darkened without warning. The first heavy drops struck the dusty ground. Within seconds, the heavens opened. Rain hammered the corrugated roof so loudly, the conversation became impossible. The red dust transformed into thick, sticky mud almost instantly. Tommy stared in amazement. "I've never seen rain like this." A sergeant walking past laughed. "In 5 minutes it'll stop." He was right. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the rain eased. Steam rose from the ground. The air somehow felt even hotter. By evening, Mike and a dozen other replacements climbed into the back of a 2.5-ton cargo truck. Sandbags lined the wooden sides. The driver revved the engine. As they pulled away from the airfield, Mike caught his first real glimpse of Vietnam. Children waved from the roadside. Women wearing conical hats carried baskets suspended from bamboo poles. Small bicycles weaved through traffic with impossible confidence. Street vendors cooked food over charcoal fires. The smells drifted into the truck: garlic fish sauce, spices he couldn't name. Life continued, almost as if there wasn't a war. Then the truck passed a military cemetery, row after row of white crosses. Conversation stopped. Night fell quickly. The jungle beyond the road became an endless black wall. Every shadow seemed to move. The truck eventually rolled through a gate surrounded by concertina wire and sandbagged bunkers. A faded sign read, 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, Home. For now. A staff sergeant stood waiting. He was broad-shouldered, his jungle fatigues faded from countless washings. His sleeves were rolled neatly, and his face bore the permanent squint of a man accustomed to scanning distant tree lines. "I'm Staff Sergeant Frank Donovan." Nobody spoke. He looked at each newcomer carefully. "You boys are replacements." A pause. "That means somebody else isn't coming back." The words landed heavily. Donovan continued. "I've been here 11 months. He pointed toward the dark jungle beyond the perimeter. "Out there, the jungle doesn't care how brave you are. It doesn't care where you're from. It doesn't care if you've got a sweetheart waiting back home. It'll kill you just the same if you make one stupid mistake." He let the silence linger. "So tomorrow, we'll start teaching you how not to make one." That night, Mike lay on his bunk beneath a mosquito net. The sounds were unlike anything he had ever heard. Insects buzzed endlessly. Tree frogs croaked from somewhere beyond the wire. Generators hummed. Far away, artillery thundered like distant storms. Every now and then, a Huey swept overhead, its rotor blades beating the night air before fading into the darkness. Sleep refused to come. He reached beneath his pillow and removed the letter he'd written on the flight. He read it again. "I'm not worried." He almost laughed. He folded it carefully and tucked it back into his pocket. Outside, a flare suddenly climbed into the night sky, bathing the jungle in ghostly white light for a few brief seconds before drifting slowly back toward the earth. Someone shouted from a guard tower. A machine gun bolt slammed forward. Mike held his breath. Nothing happened. The jungle swallowed the silence once more. He finally closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would meet the men he'd patrol with. Tomorrow his training would truly begin. And somewhere beyond the wire, hidden beneath that endless canopy of green, the war was already waiting for him. Chapter 3. Learning to Stay Alive. 1st Cavalry Division Base. Camp. September 1965. The whistle shrieked through the darkness. Mike's eyes flew open. For a brief second, he had no idea where he was. Then the heat hit him. The mosquito net, the canvas roof, the distant thump of helicopter rotors, Vietnam. "Move, move, move!" The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Frank Donovan. "If you're still in your bunk in 30 seconds, I'll leave you here for the mosquitoes to finish." The barracks erupted into movement, boots slammed onto wooden floors. Duffel bags were thrown aside. Helmets were snatched from hooks. Within moments, 20 sleepy young soldiers stumbled into the gray light before dawn. The eastern sky glowed faintly behind a curtain of mist. Everything smelled damp. The jungle never truly dried. Donovan walked slowly along the line, his eyes settled on every face. Take a good look around. The recruits exchanged puzzled glances. "You see these men?" He pointed at them. "Some of you won't be standing here this time next year." Silence. Nobody laughed. Nobody looked away. Donovan nodded. "Good. That means you're starting to understand." Breakfast consisted of powdered eggs, toast that tasted faintly of cardboard, canned peaches, and coffee so strong it seemed capable of stripping paint. Tommy poked suspiciously at his eggs. "I reckon my mother would cry if she saw this." Across the table, an older corporal grinned. "Kid, after your first week in the bush, you'll eat anything that doesn't bite back." The table burst into laughter. Mike laughed too. It felt good. Normal. Almost. By 7 o'clock, they were gathered beneath a row of towering rubber trees. Donovan stood beside a crude sand table built from packed earth. A map had been scratched into its surface with a stick. He picked up a long bamboo pointer. "Rule number 1. He looked directly at Mike. "Never—" He jabbed the pointer into the dirt. Walk down the middle of a trail. Mike frowned. Why, Sergeant? Donovan smiled. Because that's exactly where I'd put the mine if I wanted to kill you. He motioned toward the jungle. The enemy knows you're looking ahead. So they attack from above. He pointed into the trees. They attack from below. He pointed at the ground. They attack from behind. Another pause, and sometimes they don't attack at all. He let those words settle. They wait. The recruits spent the morning learning how to read the jungle. Broken branches, fresh footprints, discarded cigarette ends, recently cut bamboo, mud that had been disturbed. Every tiny detail told a story. You boys have spent your lives looking. Donovan crouched beside a patch of disturbed earth. In Vietnam, you learned to see. Around midday, the training became more practical. Claymore mines, trip flares, M18 smoke grenades, the M16 rifle, the M60 machine gun, the M79 grenade launcher. Each man stripped his weapon until it lay in pieces on a poncho. You'll clean this rifle every chance you get. Donovan held up a mud-covered bolt. Jungle dirt gets everywhere. He slammed the bolt back into place. If your rifle jams when Charlie is 20 yards away, he shrugged. You won't get a second chance. Mike worked carefully, determined to remember every part. The afternoon patrol began shortly after lunch. Not into enemy territory, just beyond the wire. Still. The atmosphere changed immediately. The jokes disappeared. Conversation stopped. Donovan raised a clenched fist. The patrol halted. He pointed to the man in front, spacing, 5 meters between each soldier. If one man gets hit, the rest don't. Mike watched the line snake silently through the jungle. No one marched upright, everyone crouched slightly. Weapons always pointing outward, eyes constantly moving. The jungle seemed strangely peaceful. Birds called overhead. Bright butterflies drifted through shafts of sunlight. Tiny streams trickled beneath tangled roots. It almost looked beautiful. Donovan suddenly knelt. His fist shot into the air. The patrol froze instantly. Mike's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Donovan beckoned him forward. Come here. Mike carefully approached. What do you see? He scanned the ground. Leaves? Donovan smiled. Look harder. Mike crouched. There, almost invisible. A thin length of fishing line stretched across the path. His stomach tightened. What is it? A lesson. Donovan carefully brushed away the leaves. Beneath them lay a practice grenade rigged as a booby trap. It isn't live. He looked at Mike. But the next one might be. Mike stared silently. He had walked straight past it. He hadn't even seen it. The patrol continued. Every sound seemed louder now. Every vine, every shadow, every fallen log. The jungle no longer looked peaceful. It looked like it was hiding something. As evening approached, they reached a small clearing. Donovan gathered the recruits. You've all watched too many war movies. A few smiled. Forget them. He pointed toward the trees. The enemy isn't stupid. He won't stand up so you can shoot him. He won't charge across an open field. He'll wait. He'll let you walk into him. He'll disappear before you know where he was. He looked at every face. If you ever stop respecting this jungle, it'll bury you. The return march took place beneath gathering storm clouds. Thunder rolled across the distant hills. The first fat raindrops splashed against helmets. Within moments, the heavens burst open. Rain hammered the canopy with deafening force. The narrow trail became a stream of red mud. Mike slipped, caught himself, kept moving. There was no choice. Everything became soaked. His uniform, his socks, his rifle, even breathing seemed harder. Tommy leaned close enough to be heard over the downpour. "I can't hear a thing," Mike shouted back. "I don't think we're supposed to." Donovan's voice carried down the column. "Exactly. That's when they like to move." Mike glanced into the wall of green beside him. The rain had turned the jungle into shifting shadows. Every dark shape looked like a movie. Every movement looked real. He gripped his rifle tighter. The enemy never appeared. But for the first time, Mike understood that fear didn't need bullets. Sometimes fear was simply not knowing what lay 20 feet beyond the trees. That night, as he cleaned the red mud from his M16 by the light of a dim lantern, Mike realized something. He had come to Vietnam believing war was about firefights. After only one day beyond the wire, he understood. The jungle fought you every minute. The enemy only had to finish the job. Chapter 4. The 1st Patrol, 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, Central Highlands, Republic of Vietnam, September 1965. The jungle looked different beyond the last strand of concertina wire. Inside the perimeter, it was merely a wall of green surrounding the camp. Outside, it became another world. The sky was only beginning to lighten when Staff Sergeant Frank Donovan gathered 2nd Squad beside 3 waiting Huey helicopters. Their turbine engines whined softly as mechanics made final checks, and the great rotor blades slowly gathered speed until the familiar whoop, whoop, whoop echoed across the landing zone. Mike tightened the chin strap on his helmet. Today wasn't another training exercise. Today they were leaving the safety of the base. Today they were going into the bush. Donovan walked slowly along the line. Nobody spoke. "You've all trained for this." He looked each man in the eyes. "Now listen carefully." He held up his rifle. "Your weapon stays on safe until you identify a target." He pointed towards the jungle. "We are not here looking for a fight." A pause. "But if the fight finds us," his voice hardened, "finish it." Behind the squad, the crew chief slapped the side of the helicopter. "Let's go." The men jogged toward the waiting Hueys. The rotor wash hit like a tropical storm. Dust, loose leaves, bits of paper, everything lifted into the air. Mike climbed aboard, ducking instinctively beneath the spinning blades. Inside, the noise was overwhelming. Conversation was impossible. The only sounds were engines, vibration, and the metallic clatter of equipment. The crew chief checked every man with practiced eyes. Helmet secure, weapon secure, seatbelt fastened. He gave a thumbs up. Moments later, the Huey lifted from the earth. Mike looked through the open doorway. The camp shrank beneath them. Rows of green tents, artillery batteries, supply dumps, the perimeter wire. Within minutes, it had disappeared beneath an endless ocean of jungle. Trees. Nothing but trees, rolling over distant hills until they met the horizon. The canopy looked beautiful from above, almost peaceful. Donovan leaned close enough to be heard. "Remember that view?" Mike nodded. "What?" "You'll never see the enemy from up here." The helicopters flew in staggered formation. Far below, muddy rivers twisted through the valleys like brown snakes. Small villages appeared briefly before vanishing beneath the forest. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Water buffalo grazed quietly in flooded rice paddies. Children stopped to wave at the aircraft. Then, only jungle again. After 40 minutes, the lead helicopter banked sharply. The pilots descended toward a small clearing carved into the trees. The clearing looked barely large enough. Mike's heart began to race. The helicopter hovered. The crew chief pointed toward the ground. 30 seconds. He shouted something else, but the engine swallowed the words. The men stood, weapons ready. The helicopter dropped lower. Grass whipped violently beneath the rotor wash. Dust exploded upward. Go! 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 Mike jumped. His boots hit the earth harder than expected. He stumbled. Recovered. Ran toward the tree line exactly as he'd been taught. The Huey lifted away almost immediately. Within seconds, the sound faded. Silence rushed back. Real silence. No engines. No generators. No voices. Only insects. Birds. And the wind moving gently through millions of leaves. Mike suddenly understood why veterans hated it when the helicopters left. The aircraft carried more than supplies. They carried certainty. Once they disappeared, you were on your own. Donovan checked his compass. Charlie Brooks moved to the front. Point man. The most dangerous place in the patrol. Mike watched Charlie carefully. Every step seemed deliberate. He never brushed against vegetation if he could avoid it. Never stepped over logs, always around them. He constantly scanned the ground, the trees, the branches, everything. Tommy whispered behind Mike. I don't know how he sees anything, Mike whispered back. I don't think he misses much. Charlie heard them. Without turning around, he quietly replied, and that's why I'm still alive. The patrol moved deeper into the jungle. The air beneath the canopy was darker than Mike expected. Towering trees blocked much of the sunlight. Huge vines hung from branches like thick ropes. Roots twisted across the ground. The smell of damp earth mixed with decaying leaves. Mosquitoes buzzed endlessly around their faces. Sweat soaked every man's uniform. Within an hour, Mike's shirt clung to his back. His boots squelched with every step. It felt as though the jungle wanted to slow them. Around midday, Donovan raised a clenched fist. The patrol stopped instantly. He crouched beside a narrow stream. Charlie pointed at the muddy bank, fresh footprints. Mike leaned forward. The prints were clear, bare feet. Several men, recently made. Donovan studied them quietly. They're moving south. Billy Jenkins frowned. Civilians? Donovan shook his head. No. He pointed to one print. The heel's deeper. Mike looked confused. What does that mean? They're carrying weight. Another footprint. See the spacing? Mike nodded slowly. They're walking tactically. Donovan smiled. Exactly. Tommy swallowed. So, soldiers? Donovan stood. Probably. Nobody asked which side. They already knew. The patrol changed formation. The distance between men increased. Conversation ceased completely. The jungle suddenly felt much smaller. Mike found himself staring into every patch of shadow, every fallen log, every bamboo thicket. His finger rested alongside the trigger guard exactly as he'd been taught. Not on the trigger, never on the trigger. The afternoon wore on. Nothing happened. And somehow, that made it worse. Every snapped twig sent adrenaline surging. Every bird suddenly taking flight made heads turn. Every breeze rustling leaves sounded like movement. Mike finally understood something Donovan had tried to teach. The jungle played tricks on the mind. It made ordinary sounds feel dangerous. Then, when danger finally came, it often arrived without warning. Late in the afternoon, they reached a small ridgeline overlooking a shallow valley. Donovan studied his map. We're staying here tonight. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Mike looked toward the setting sun. They were spending the night out here. There would be no tents, no lights, no campfires, no hot meal. Each man quietly dug a shallow fighting position with his entrenching tool. The soil was hard beneath the first few inches. Tree roots fought every swing. Within half an hour, Mike had scraped together a hole barely deep enough to lie behind. It didn't look like much. Donovan inspected it. Good. Mike looked doubtful. This'll stop bullets? Donovan smiled faintly. It'll stop more than standing up will. Darkness arrived astonishingly fast. One moment the jungle was dim. The next, it was black. Not city darkness, real darkness. The kind that swallowed distance. The kind where a man 10 yards away became invisible. The squad ate cold sea rations in silence. Mike opened a tin of ham and lima beans. Tommy grimaced. "You want to trade? What have you got?" "Beans and francs." Mike laughed quietly. "Deal." Even in Vietnam, trading rations was becoming tradition. At 2100 hours, Donovan gathered the squad. No smoking. No unnecessary talking. No movement unless ordered. He looked around slowly. The jungle listens. Mike took the first watch with Charlie Brooks. The night seemed alive. Cicadas screamed. Tree frogs croaked. Somewhere far away, a monkey called through the darkness. Charlie spoke so quietly, Mike barely heard him. "Don't stare." Mike frowned. "What?" "The new guys always stare. I don't understand. You keep trying to see something." Charlie kept watching the jungle. "You won't. You'll hear it first." Hours passed. Nothing moved. Mike's eyelids grew heavy. He forced himself to stay alert. Then Charlie slowly raised one hand. Mike froze. Charlie tilted his head slightly. There, very faint. Almost lost beneath the insects. A sound, not an animal, not the wind. A soft snap, like a twig breaking under careful weight. Mike felt every muscle tighten. Charlie's voice was barely a whisper. "Wake Donovan." Mike moved carefully through the darkness. No sudden movements, no noise. He reached the sergeant's position. "Sergeant!" Donovan's eyes opened instantly. He had not really been asleep. "What is it?" Charlie heard something. Donovan was already reaching for his rifle. Within seconds, the squad was awake. No panic, no shouting, only disciplined silence. Every rifle pointed toward the black wall of jungle. The sounds stopped. Nothing. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The tension became unbearable. Mike could hear his own heartbeat. Suddenly, from somewhere beyond the trees, came the unmistakable metallic click of a rifle bolt being drawn back. No one moved. No one breathed. The jungle had just spoken. And for the first time, it wasn't pretending. Chapter 5. Contact. Central Highlands, Republic of Vietnam, September 1965. The metallic click echoed through the darkness. Every man in Second Squad heard it. No one moved. No one breathed. Mike Sullivan gripped his M16 so tightly, his knuckles ached. The jungle, alive with insects only moments before, suddenly felt unnaturally still. Staff Sergeant Frank Donovan slowly crawled beside Charlie Brooks at the forward edge of the perimeter. "What did you hear?" Charlie's eyes never left the darkness. "Rifle bolt." Donovan nodded. "So did I." The old sergeant raised one clenched fist. Every soldier silently brought his rifle to his shoulder. No shouted orders, no panic. Months of experience against days of training. The veterans knew something the new men were only beginning to understand. When the jungle became quiet, it was listening. A minute passed, then another. Mike could hear sweat dripping from the brim of his helmet onto the damp earth beneath him. His heart pounded so loudly he wondered if the enemy could hear it. Beside him, Tommy Walker whispered, "You see anything?" Mike barely moved his lips. "No." Charlie suddenly hissed, "Movement." Every rifle shifted toward the same patch of darkness. Nothing. Only bamboo, swaying gently. Mike strained his eyes until they watered. Still nothing. Then a shadow moved. So quickly, Mike almost convinced himself he had imagined it. Donovan's voice came like a breath. "Hold your fire!" Another shadow. Lower to the ground. Moving carefully. Deliberately. Mike caught the faint outline of a conical hat disappearing behind a tree. His pulse hammered. He had just seen the enemy for the first time. The jungle exploded. A burst of automatic fire ripped through the darkness. Orange muzzle flashes flickered between the trees. Bullets tore through branches above the American positions. Leaves rained down. "Down!" Donovan's voice cut through the chaos. Mike threw himself deeper into his shallow foxhole as rounds snapped overhead with a sound unlike anything he'd ever imagined. Not a whistle, not a crack. More like angry hornets tearing through the air. Tommy shouted, "They're in the trees! They're moving!" Machine gun fire erupted from Eddie Ramirez's M60. The weapon roared. Long, controlled bursts. The muzzle flash illuminated Eddie's determined face. Spent brass cascaded into the mud. The heavy rounds smashed through bamboo and saplings, shredding vegetation. Mike forced himself to remember his training. Don't shoot blindly. Identify your target. He searched desperately through the darkness. Then he saw movement, a figure darting between two trees. He squeezed the trigger. His rifle bucked against his shoulder. 3 controlled shots. The figure vanished. He had no idea if he'd hit anyone. "Billy!" Donovan shouted. "Get battalion!" Billy Jenkins had already pulled the PRC-25 radio onto his lap. His fingers moved rapidly across the controls. "This is Bravo 2-1. He spoke with surprising calm. "Receiving fire." He listened, static. Then a reply. Mike couldn't make out the words over the gunfire. Another burst slammed into the American position. A bullet struck the tree beside Mike's foxhole. Wood exploded into splinters that peppered his face. For one terrifying second, he froze. Everything around him blurred. The noise became distant. Then Donovan's voice crashed through the haze. "Mike!" Mike looked up. "Return fire!" Training replaced fear. He fired again. Short bursts. Never wasting ammunition. Exactly as he'd been taught. A grenade exploded somewhere to their left. The blast shook the ground. Someone screamed. Not an enemy. One of their own. "Medic!" Doc Harris was already moving. Ignoring the incoming fire, he crawled through the mud toward the wounded man. Mike stared in disbelief. The medic carried no weapon in his hands. Only his medical bag. Rounds snapped past him. He never slowed. The firefight intensified. More muzzle flashes. More movement. The enemy wasn't charging. They were probing, testing the American line, looking for weakness. Donovan recognized it immediately. "They're feeling us out." He pointed toward Charlie. "Watch that flank." Charlie was already there. His rifle barked steadily, precise, controlled. A veteran's shooting. Suddenly, Tommy cried out, "My leg!" Mike turned. Tommy had fallen backward into his foxhole. Blood darkened his trouser leg just above the knee. "I've been hit!" The words hit Mike harder than the gunfire. His best friend. Only days ago they had laughed about Texas weather. Now, Tommy was bleeding. Without thinking, Mike crawled toward him. Bullets snapped overhead. Mud sprayed across his helmet. Doc Harris reached them seconds later. "Keep pressure here." He thrust a field dressing into Mike's hands. Mike pressed hard against the wound. Tommy gritted his teeth. "It burns." Doc nodded. "Good. If it burns, you're alive." Another burst of enemy fire swept across the position, this time much closer. Charlie shouted, "They're trying to flank us." Donovan reacted instantly. "Eddie, traverse left." The M60 swung. Its roar drowned everything else. The jungle seemed to disintegrate beneath the hail of 7.62 millimeter rounds. Trees splintered, branches crashed down. The enemy fire slackened. Another burst of enemy fire swept across the position, this time much closer. Charlie shouted, "They're trying to flank us." Donovan reacted instantly. "Eddie! Traverse left!" The M60 swung. Its roar drowned everything else. The jungle seemed to disintegrate beneath the hail of 7.62 millimeter rounds. Trees splintered, branches crashed down, the enemy fire slackened. For nearly 20 minutes the battle raged. Time lost all meaning. The world became noise, smoke, mud, fear, orders, reload, fire, reload again. Mike had no idea how many rounds he had fired. He only knew he kept moving, kept listening, kept surviving. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the firing stopped, not gradually, instantly. Silence returned, broken only by distant insects. Mike blinked. His ears rang. The smell of burnt gunpowder hung heavy beneath the jungle canopy. No one moved. No one trusted the silence. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Charlie finally whispered, "I think they're gone." Donovan shook his head. "No. They've chosen to leave." He looked around the perimeter. That's different. As dawn slowly filtered through the trees, the squad began assessing the damage. Tommy would live. The bullet had passed cleanly through the muscle. One soldier had a graze across his shoulder, another had a hand shredded by flying splinters. Miraculously, no one had been killed. Mike sat heavily against a tree. His hands shook uncontrollably. He looked down. His sleeves were stained with blood. For one horrifying moment, he thought it was his own. Then he remembered. Tommy. He had been pressing on Tommy's wound. The blood wasn't his. The realization brought no comfort. Donovan sat beside him. "You did all right." Mike stared ahead. "I froze. For a second. I was scared." Donovan lit a cigarette. "So was I." Mike looked at him. "You?" The sergeant smiled faintly. "Anyone who tells you they weren't scared in their first firefight," he took a drag, "is either lying or wasn't there." The radio crackled. Orders had arrived. The patrol was to return to base immediately. Helicopters were already on their way. As the familiar sound of Hueys echoed across the valley, Mike looked back toward the jungle. Somewhere beyond those trees, men who had tried to kill him only hours earlier were slipping silently through the forest. They had vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind questions, fear, and the knowledge that next time the outcome might be very different. Mike picked up his rifle. It felt heavier now. Not because of its weight, because of what it meant. The young man who had stepped off an airplane in Saigon was gone. In his place stood a soldier who had heard bullets crack through the jungle. Asung. And lived to hear the silence afterward. Chapter 6. Baptism of Fire. 1st Cavalry Division Base Camp. The rhythmic beat of Huey rotor blades echoed across the valley long before the helicopters appeared above the trees. 2nd Squad stood in the clearing, tired, muddy, and silent. No one waved, no one spoke. The excitement that had filled the flight into the jungle only the day before had disappeared. The helicopter settled onto the landing zone in clouds of red dust. As soon as the skids touched the ground, Doc Harris and 2 stretcher bearers carefully carried Tommy Walker aboard. Tommy managed a weak grin as Mike climbed beside him. "I guess this gets me out of peeling potatoes." Mike smiled. "You'll still complain about the food." Tommy laughed, then winced as pain shot through his leg. "You tell the boys. I'll be back." Mike nodded. "We'll keep your place." The crew chief slapped the side of the helicopter. Seconds later, it lifted into the gray morning sky, carrying Tommy toward the field hospital. Mike watched until it disappeared beyond the hills. The remaining men climbed aboard another Huey. No one looked out the doors. No one admired the jungle below. They had seen enough of it. Back at base camp, the familiar sounds of generators, helicopters, and trucks somehow felt comforting. The camp no longer looked like a temporary stop. It felt like home, at least for now. That evening, Donovan gathered the squad outside their barracks. He looked at each man for a long moment. "You all came back." There was quiet pride in his voice. "Not every squad does." No one answered. The words carried more weight than any speech. After chow, Mike sat alone outside the barracks cleaning his rifle. Red mud still clung stubbornly to the stock. He worked slowly, carefully wiping every part exactly as Donovan had taught him. The rifle looked the same, he didn't. Across the compound, helicopters continued landing and taking off. Some carried supplies. Others carried wounded men. The war never stopped, not even for a single day. Donovan walked over carrying 2 enamel mugs of coffee. He handed one to Mike. "You thinking?" Mike nodded. "I keep wondering..." He hesitated. "I fired." "I know I fired." He stared into the black coffee, "but I don't know if..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Donovan understood. "You may never know." Mike looked up. "I thought I'd feel different." "You will." "When?" The old sergeant looked toward the dark jungle beyond the wire. "When you stop asking yourself that question." Later that night, Mike unfolded the letter he'd started on the flight from California. He turned it over and began writing again. "Dear Mom and Dad, I'm settling in well. The men in my unit are good people, and they're helping me learn quickly. The weather's hotter than anything I've ever known, but I'm doing fine. Please don't worry about me. Give Sarah a hug for me, and tell Dad I'll be home before he knows it." He stopped. There was so much he wanted to say. How frightened he'd been. How bullets sounded when they snapped through leaves. How Tommy had nearly died. Instead, he folded the letter. Some things belonged in Vietnam, not in Ohio. A week later, Tommy returned to the company with a bandaged leg and a pair of crutches. The squad erupted into cheers. Tommy raised a hand. "I leave you boys alone for 5 minutes. Ahoy, and you nearly start a war without me." Laughter rolled through the barracks. For the first time since the patrol, it felt genuine. The following morning, the company assembled before sunrise. A large operations map had been pinned to a wooden board. Red grease pencil marks stretched across the Central Highlands. An intelligence officer pointed toward the mountains. "The enemy is increasing his activity here." His finger traced a valley few of the young soldiers had ever heard of. "Our division is moving north." Donovan folded his arms. Mike noticed the veteran sergeant studying the map more carefully than anyone else. As the briefing ended, Mike walked beside him. "Sergeant, is something wrong?" Donovan remained silent for a moment. Finally, he answered, "No." He looked toward the distant mountains. "But if the reports are right, we're about to meet the North Vietnamese army." Mike frowned. "I thought we already had." Donovan shook his head slowly. "No, son. What you've seen so far was only the beginning." That evening, the sun disappeared behind the jungle in a blaze of crimson. Mike stood alone beside the perimeter wire. Only weeks earlier, he had arrived as an eager young recruit, believing courage was the absence of fear. Now he understood the truth. Courage was stepping forward despite the fear. Behind him, the camp buzzed with preparations. Helicopters were being serviced. Crates of ammunition were loaded. Maps unfolded. Orders whispered. Somewhere beyond the mountains, another battle was waiting. Mike adjusted the St. Christopher medal beneath his shirt. He no longer wore it for luck. He wore it to remember home. As darkness settled over Vietnam, he picked up his rifle and walked back toward his squad. Whatever lay ahead, he would not face it alone. End of Book 1, to be continued. Book 2, Voices from the Ranks. The Long Patrol, Ia Drang. Some battles make history, others make soldiers. Ia Drang would do both.